Last year, more than 3 made one of the most important decisions of their lives. They went before Protestant ministers, Catholic priests, Jewish rabbis, and justices of the peace to pronounce their marriage vows. I take you for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. And yet, last year, almost 800,000 Americans, for one reason or another, broke that vow. They entered divorce courts to petition for the legal dissolution of their marriages. Between these two statistics, there lies a soul-searing drama of crisis and conflict. And the tragedy of these couples is not theirs alone. For it deeply affects their children, and it affects the life of our nation. For America is only as strong as her homes, and the American home is only as strong as the marriage bond, which is its pulsating heart.
Insight, the religious principles underlying American democracy, the fundamental connection between faith and freedom.
How do you do? My name's Father Kieser. The figures you have just heard are alarming. Our divorce rate in America is the second highest in the world. And yet the picture isn't completely black. Because even by the most conservative estimates, for every divorce, there are at least 3 marriages that succeed. These marriages give to their participants a full measure of happiness in this world, and they prepare them for even a greater happiness in the world to come. These strong and stable marriages are the bedrock of our American democracy. But what causes certain marriages to fail while others succeed? What does marriage require of the individual? What can it give? Has marriage a purpose? What does it take to fulfill it? Is there a secret to a happy marriage? These are crucial questions. They are important to you because in all probability, marriage is your vocation, your pathway to God. And they are important to the nation, for no country can be strong when its homes are weak. Dr. James Bossard, in a recent article in Life magazine, says that the trouble with American marriage is American courtship. There is much evidence to confirm this conclusion. So often the problems begin even before the couple approach the altar. And so today, let us look into the lives of 2 young Americans as they begin their life together in courtship.
Hi, I'm Jean Stockton, and I'm a junior at Central High. I think the most important thing about high school is boys. You know, they sort of make eyes at you and everything, but that's better than pulling your hair and making faces at you like they used to do in grade school. I love to go to the football games and the Saturday night dances. You know, last Saturday night I was telling my friend Joyce that I had 13 cuts in one dance. Well, I'm not really bragging or anything, but it is kind of nice to be noticed. I like to be serious, too, but mostly I just find myself dancing and laughing and sort of fooling around. But it's not so good if all the fun makes you late for class. You know, a lot of my friends go steady, but I don't think that high school's a time to settle down. So I sort of like to go out with a lot of different people. Some of them are characters. We do some crazy things sometimes. Of course, my folks don't approve of all of it. And, you know, they think a lot of it's a waste of time, but I say it before they do. I know. It's just a stage I'm going through.
Hi. I'm Jim Prescott. I'll graduate from Lafayette High in June, if I'm lucky. I was a little older when girls really started to get to me. At first, well, they kind of made me nervous. I didn't know what to say to them. Why? I don't know. I sure had no trouble talking with the guys. It wasn't that I was afraid of girls. It was just that they scared me to death. I went to dances and never danced. I just stood in the corner and messed around with the guys and talked to them about football.
There was one girl, though. Her name was Helen. I went kind of steady with her for
about 6 months during my junior year. It wasn't that we really liked each other, but we sort of got used to it. If a guy isn't going to be a square, he wants to be sure of a date every week. And going steady seemed like the only answer. I just didn't like the idea too much. They tried to tell me I was, taking the easy way out. But I didn't think they understood me anyway. Well, I got over my shyness. I found out that you could talk to girls just like you do to boys, no sweat. I didn't need Helen, and she didn't need me either. So after a while, we broke up. I started going out with other girls, and man, I really flipped. Now I didn't want to be tied down at all. There were places to go and people to meet. Why get yourself hooked up to one girl? I hate to admit it, but my parents were right. Going steady in high school is a real drag. It takes all the fun out of being a bachelor.
The next 3 years were busy ones for Gene and Jim. He graduated from Lafayette, went on to engineering school at University of California. Gene enrolled at UCLA the following year. Young, pretty, and vivacious, she was immediately caught up in the whirl of campus life. New people to meet, new places to go, new things to learn. Gene found it all very exciting. Jim and Gene met at a dormitory party. One thing is certain, it was not love at first sight. Jim was more interested in one of Gene's friends, and Gene, well, she couldn't have been less impressed with Jim. His hair was mussed and his clothes were all wrong, yet there was something special about him. Nothing affected, just a warm, contagious smile. A week later, they met again. They talked a bit, and Jim asked Gene out. She accepted. They dated pretty regularly after that. The usual college socials, dances, and parties. Jim began to lose interest in Gene's girlfriend. And he did start to comb his hair. And all of a sudden, his clothes weren't that awful.
Besides Jim sprucing up a little bit, there was something else different about him. I found I could tell him little things that I couldn't tell to anybody else. He understood what I meant, and he really seemed to care. You know, it seemed like we were on the same wavelength. After a party or a dance, we'd stop off someplace just for a snack. You know, just the two of us, and spend hours talking. We had our share of laughs. But I found I could talk about serious things, too. After a while, there was nothing I couldn't tell him. Well, at first it was all very intellectual, you know, disarmament, atomic tests, neutralism, save civilization, and all that. Of course, we sometimes talked about our friends, but more and more as time went on, we talked about each other and realized that we were more than just friends. We really cared about each other without admitting we were in love.
This was a great time for us. I really settled down. My studies picked up. Now I had an incentive to learn. Boy, we had our problems, too. I gotta be honest with you. I went for Gene in a big way, physically, I mean. Sometimes, well, you know how it is. Sometimes I got carried away. Most of the time she kept me in line, but there were times when, well, we went too far. It nearly wrecked our relationship. I gave her the line I gave a lot of other girls, that this was my way of showing love. But I was lying, and she knew it. She started to act funny when we were together, and it made me feel guilty. I think she was losing respect for me. Sometimes I couldn't look her in the face after one of those sessions. You know what I was doing? I was using her, that's all. Using her for my own kicks. Let's face it, if you're in love with a girl, you don't want to use her that way. So it's hard. So you're a big Lothario, and you fooled around a lot, and she's as weak as you are, or weaker. If you really love her, you've got to stop. That's all there is to it. Stopping is not easy, but it is possible. Gene and I just drew the line. The first couple of dates after that, well, it was a little different. We were both trying so hard to help the other that things got pretty tense. We learned to laugh at ourselves. That relaxed the tension. and it helped me settle down. As the time passed and we fell more in love, control was a little easier. We wanted each other, but the time wasn't right yet, so we decided to avoid all those situations that might give us trouble. We did our talking at the drugstore or at the restaurant. The parked car was out. And I always said goodnight at the front door. The snapshot kisses were no problem. It was those time exposures that caused all the trouble. I don't want to take too much credit, though. I couldn't have made it without her, and vice versa. You know something? I think real love and control go together. You can't really have one without the other.
Jim and Jean face the perennial problem of the unmarried. How far to go? Where does love stop and lust begin? And they learn the crucial lesson that love and control do go together, that the one quite naturally leads to the other. Sexual morality is not a series of laws imposed from without, but it springs from the very nature of love itself. This is why love and sexual license are incompatible. After all, love seeks to give, and license demands. Love builds, and license tears down. Love ennobles a human being, and license degrades him. Anybody who says to you, "I love you, let us sin together," can only be called a liar. He does not love you at all, because by that sin he is seeking to destroy you. Sex in a human being is more than a blind animal instinct. It's a human act, and so it must be governed by reason and intelligence. It must be put at the service of love. Sex in a human being is brain-centered, and so it must be brain-controlled. Controlled, that is, by the principles of intelligence and morality. Now, I know control isn't easy, but control is possible, and you are not fully a human being until you have accomplished it. The sexual act is a very beautiful and sacred thing, but it has its proper place, just like a precious jewel. It has a proper setting. Proper place for the marriage act is marriage, not the back seat of an automobile. This is why those who are truly in love will learn to discipline themselves and to abstain before marriage from those acts which could lead to physical union. This is the way it was with Jim and Jean. The problem of control before marriage is not to love less, but to love more fully, more deeply. And the more perfect that love, the greater will be the purity. The experience of Jim and Jean brings that out.
I not only love Jim, I admire him as well. He's strong, and he's disciplined, and he's considerate of me. And that's what makes me sure that he's the kind of the man that I want. Not just for kid games, but for always. One night Jim proposed. It happened at a restaurant about midnight. There wasn't any fanfare, no great burst of emotion, just over a cup of coffee. And all he said was, "I love you. Will you marry me?" Well, I'm a girl, and I knew it was coming. I had my answer already, so all I said was, "When?" It's hard to describe how you feel about the man you love, unless you're a songwriter or something. And, well, love is too big a thing to be put into words.
It took a while for her to make up my mind. It wasn't that I didn't love her. I loved her all right. Marriage, boy, that's a big step. Serious business. A guy can get clobbered. I wanted to be sure, and I had to think the thing through. Is this love for her really what I think it is? Like, well, is it strong enough for sacrifice? Am I being realistic about everything? This is no time to let your emotions run away with you. I was aware of Jean's good qualities, but let's face it, she's a female and she had some faults. I asked myself, are you ready to live with these faults for the rest of your life? And she was aware of my faults, too. They're so obvious because there's so many of them. I had made strides, but there's still a little room for improvement. Then the responsibilities of marriage got to me. I would have to give up anything, renounce everything that would interfere with her happiness. Could I do that? Was I Was I up to being a father? I thought about it and prayed about it, and I needed God's help, that's a cinch. I wanted to know what he thought of all this. Well, it took me a while to mull these things over. It wasn't that I doubted her. Like I said, she's a great girl. I doubted myself. Was I ready to give myself to her? Completely. Fully. To no one else, all our lives, and maybe even into eternity. It's a long time. But I always figured that a girl like Jean, a girl you really love, deserves that kind of commitment.
The decision to marry is so important, both to the individuals involved and to the nation, that it can only be wisely made after much sober reflection. The couple must know what they're doing, and they must freely want to do it. Free consent is of the very essence of the marriage contract. Without freedom, without consent, there can be no commitment. And so the couple are free about whether or not to enter into marriage, but they are not free about the nature of marriage itself. That's rooted in human nature. It flows from the nature of love. It has been set down for all time by God himself. Those who are truly in love will want to give themselves completely and totally to each other on a permanent, exclusive basis. Until you are ready for that kind of commitment, you are not ready for marriage. The person in love doesn't say, I want to give myself to you until I get that promotion I'm after, or until we have our first fight, or until I feel like going home to mother. That's not the language of love. The person really in love says, I love you so much that I want to belong to you alone forever, forever. Notice in your love songs how often those words forever and eternity come up. The marriage contract must be a permanent one. The welfare of the couple themselves demands that. So does that of the children. And the will of God is very clear. What God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. The marriage contract is also an exclusive one. One man with one woman. There's no room for third parties. Again, the lover doesn't say, I'll take you until something better comes along. That's not the language of love. The person truly in love says, I love you so much that I want to belong to you alone forever. So it was with Jim and Jean.
Their wedding took place at the Church of St. Paul the Apostle in Westwood. It was a beautiful ceremony. Jim was a bit shaky in the sacristy beforehand. Jean was a little nervous. But once she took his arm at the altar, all the tension disappeared. There wasn't even a quiver in their voices as they recited their vows.
I, James Prescott, take you, Jean Bryan Stockton, for my lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health until death do us part.
I, Jean Bryan Stockton, take you, James Prescott, for my lawful husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. At this point, you so often are told that they lived happily ever after. Well, I'm afraid it's not just that simple. The first 6 months of our marriage, they did have their difficult moments. I had to learn to cook and to sew and clean the apartment. Well, I expected to do that, but I also had to learn that I couldn't always have my own way. I had someone else to consult. And believe me, Jim wanted to be consulted. You know that living with someone is much different from dating someone. It's an entirely new experience. It makes demands that I never expected. Our differences were not really major ones, but they did seem important to us at the time. For instance, I couldn't believe it. I'd heard about male folks laughing at the latest fashions, especially hats. And when I showed him my new chapeau, he growled like a bear, and I started to cry, and then I got furious. And I swore I was going back to my mother, and he, the nincompoop, just sat there, confused and surprised by the whole thing. Men. And yet, in the midst of all our pettiness, we never lost our ability to talk to each other. Even if I was angry and hurt, I could tell him so. And when I did, well, it all seemed so unimportant.
Marriage was a revelation for me, too. I don't mean I missed drinking beer with the boys. I'd had enough beer in college to float the enterprise. But when you're married to someone, you get to know them a little better. I found out about her moods. Like most people, Jean had her good and her bad days. What else could I have expected? I really hadn't realized how sensitive a woman is and how much affection and assurance they need. Sometimes you've got to be gentle and treat them with kid gloves. Well, it took me a while to learn this, and I'm afraid I hurt Jean several times in the process. I tried to be realistic when I got married, but I'm afraid I expected too much. Oh, the honeymoon just couldn't last, and when it passes, the same problems and the shortcomings are there. Jean is the most wonderful human being I know. She is only a human being. She has made me very happy, but she can't make me perfectly happy. I know that now. There's only one perfect being and one perfect happiness. And there's nothing perfect on this earth.
Jim's experience is not an uncommon one. There's a strong tendency in all of us to confuse our need for God with our need for another human being. This is a serious mistake. Simone Weil, the great Jewish philosopher and thinker, puts it this way: what makes physical desire so powerful in you is not a physical thing. It is powerful because you make it the vehicle by which of that which is most essential in you, the need for God. This is a very important point. Those who enter marriage thinking that human love in general, and the Marriage Act in particular, will solve all their problems and give them perfect fulfillment, are going to be sadly disappointed. They make the mistake of Don Juan, who looked for perfect happiness where it cannot be found. You have to be realistic here. You have been made for the face-to-face vision of God, and nothing short of that is going to fully content you. It's unwise to expect too much from a marriage. And yet you can work to spiritualize things. You can learn to look for the face of God in the soul of this person whom you love. And you can serve God by serving him.
I worked for the first year of our marriage. I had a good job, and I enjoyed it a lot. But after a while, well, I became a little restless. It was becoming harder and harder to love a typewriter. I felt the need for something deeper in our lives. How shall I say it? I wanted some profound purpose. Our love for each other was so strong and vital that it just had to overflow, to radiate, to project itself into a fuller creation. Or shall I say it simply? I was going to have a baby.
I can't tell you what a difference Jimmy has made in our lives. I know you've heard it a million times, but really I can see Jean in him. And I see myself, too. His little character has given our life a whole new dimension. I think I love Jean more now, and I think we're closer because we created something together. Jimmy has changed things in another way, too. I'm a father now. That little fellow is dependent on me. God has entrusted him to me, not to someone else, but to me. He expects me to support him, educate him, lead him, and inspire him. That's a tall order. But the raw material of a saint has been put in my hands. It's going to take some doing, but I aim to deliver the finished product.
When I was in college, I sometimes thought of being a career girl. You know, pressing buzzers and answering the phone and being busy and people always on the go. The independence appealed to me. So for a while, I also thought that Jim was all I'd ever need. But I have different ideas now. It seems that God, in his own way, has chosen me for something other than a career. And so, a wife and mother, I find that I'm happiest. That's where I find my fulfillment.
Here we see one of love's basic laws. Love is intrinsically generous. It wants to give of itself to communicate its life to other creatures. The love of husband and wife naturally and spontaneously tends to produce the child. And that mother and father need that child to express their love and to concretize their unity. This involves the couple in a great work. They contribute to the country and to the future strength of our nation by supplying its citizens. But what they do is much more important than that, because they contribute to the kingdom of God, because this fruit of their love is destined to spend all eternity in the companionship of God. Parenthood raises that mother and father above the human level, and it enables them to share in a divine work, that of populating heaven. Now, nobody's going to minimize the tremendous sacrifices that parents must make. Their children make tremendous demands upon their patience and their generosity. It's a bit of a paradox, but it's actually in and through these sacrifices that the couple find their fulfillment. Happiness in marriage does not come from a narrow concern with each other's needs, but it comes in a mutual dedication to a work greater than either, the education of children for the service of God. This is the vocation of parents. It is their way of working out their salvation and achieving their destiny. And so the secret of happiness in marriage comes down just to one word. That word is love. A love that draws the couple together and enables them to see God in each other. A love that expresses itself in generosity and sacrifice. A love that finds revitalization in children. A love that moves them to give themselves to each other, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do them part. A love that carries them into the very arms of God himself.
Insight is a production of the Paulist Fathers, a group of Catholic priests who serve their nation as witnesses to the religious truth which underlies American freedom.